morning started like any other. The alarm went off at 6, the curtains were still drawn, and the light outside was that pale gray color that England does so well in autumn. William was already awake before the alarm sounded. He had been lying there for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house. Kate was asleep beside him, her breathing slow and steady, one hand resting near her face the way she always slept. He watched her for a moment before quietly slipping out of bed. He did not know why he felt the way he did that morning. There was no specific reason he could point to. No bad dream, no difficult phone call the night before, no news waiting to ruin the day. It was just a feeling, a heaviness that sat somewhere between his chest and his stomach and refused to explain itself. He went downstairs, made tea, and stood at the kitchen window, watching the garden. The children were still asleep. The house was quiet in that particular way. It only ever is in the early hours, before the day properly begins. He wrapped both hands around the mug and told himself he was fine. Kate came down about 40 minutes later. She found him still standing at the window, the tea half finished, his eyes somewhere far away. She did not say anything at first. She just walked over, stood beside him, and looked out at the same garden. After a moment, she put her hand on his arm. "Didn't sleep?" she asked. "Not really," he said. She nodded. She did not push for more. That was something people did not always understand about them. There were conversations that did not need words. That happened in the quiet spaces between sentences. In the way one person moved toward another without being asked. That afternoon, they had an engagement. A visit to a children's hospital in London. One of those royal duties that fills the diary every few weeks and that, for most people watching from the outside, looks like a series of polished smiles and firm handshakes. But anyone who had ever actually been in the room with William and Kate during those visits would know it was never that simple. They did not switch on a performance when they walked through those doors. Something else happened to them in places like that. Something quieter and harder. They arrived together, as they almost always did for visits like this one. The staff lined up in the entrance hall, nervous and proud in equal measure. The hospital had been preparing for weeks. The corridors had been cleaned until they gleamed. The children on the ward had been told that morning, and some of them had barely been able to eat breakfast from the excitement. William and Kate moved through the early part of the visit the way they always did, warmly, unhurriedly, stopping to talk properly rather than just to wave and move on. Kate crouched down to speak to a small girl in a wheelchair who was clutching a drawing she had made. William shook hands with a teenage boy who was trying very hard to look like he was not absolutely thrilled to be meeting a prince. There was laughter. There were moments of genuine ease, and then a nurse approached them quietly, just as they were finishing in the main ward. She leaned in and spoke in a low voice. She told them there was another room, just down the corridor. She said they did not have to go in if they felt it was too much, that it was entirely their choice, that no one would think anything of it if they chose to move on to the next part of the visit. William looked at Kate. Kate looked at William. Neither of them said they would. Rather not go. The nurse led them down a corridor that felt different from the rest of the hospital, quieter. Overhead lights were softer here. The sounds from the main ward faded behind them. There were drawings pinned to the wall made by children, bright and uneven, and full of that particular kind of hope that children have, the kind that does not yet know it should be cautious. They stopped outside a door. The nurse spoke again, very gently, and explained what was behind it. She explained who was there and what they were going through. She said the family had asked if there was any chance of a visit, that it would mean everything to them, but they understood completely if it was not possible. William felt the heaviness from that morning return, but it was different now. It had a shape. Kate reached over without looking at him and found his hand. He held it, the nurse waited, and then William reached out with his other hand and pushed the door open. What they saw when they stepped inside was not dramatic. There were no machines alarming, no chaos, no visible crisis. It was just a small room with soft light and a bed in the middle of it, and in that bed was a child. A little boy, no older than 4, with a face that was far too pale and eyes that were far too old for his age. Sitting beside him, one on each side, were his parents. They had clearly been there for a long time. Their clothes were wrinkled. Their eyes were red. They were holding their son's hands, one parent on each side. And they looked up when the door opened, with an expression that William would not be able to describe afterward. Not quite surprise. Not quite relief, something in between that had no proper name. Kate was the first to move. She crossed the room slowly and sat down in a chair near the mother. Close enough that the woman did not feel alone, but not so close that she felt crowded. She leaned in and spoke softly. William stood for a moment in the doorway, taking it in, and then he walked to the father's side of the room and pulled a chair close and sat. Down too. The little boy looked at William. William looked at the little boy. "Hello?" "Mate," he said quietly, and the boy, despite everything, despite how tired he was and how much his small body had already been through, gave him the faintest smile. It was the kind of moment that does not translate into photographs. It does not fit into a caption or a headline. It just exists, briefly and completely. In the room where it happened to people who had driven to a hospital that morning, carrying a heaviness they could not explain, and a child in a bed who had somehow, without trying, just handed them the reason for it. The boy's name was Noah. His mother told them this after a few minutes of quiet sitting. When the initial shock of the visit had softened, and the room had started to feel less like a place of waiting and more like a place where real things could happen. His name was Noah. He was 4 years old, and he had been in this hospital for 11 weeks. She said it the way people say things they have had to repeat too many times clearly without expression. Because the emotion has to be stored somewhere separate from the facts, or it becomes impossible to function. Kate listened to every word. She did not nod along automatically or fill the silences with reassurances. She just listened with the kind of attention that makes a person feel genuinely heard rather than politely tolerated. The mother noticed it. Something in her shoulders dropped slightly. The way tension releases when a person realizes they do not have to perform strength for whoever they are talking to. Across the room, William was talking to the father. Or rather, the father was talking, and William was listening, which was how it needed to be. The man, whose name was Daniel, was in his mid-30s. With the look of someone who had recently stopped sleeping and had quietly accepted that this was now just how things were. He had large hands, the kind that suggested he worked outdoors or with tools, and he kept turning a paper cup around in his fingers as he spoke. He talked about Noah the way fathers do, with a mixture of pride and helplessness that is particular to men watching. Their children suffer and finding no way to make it stop. He talked about the things Noah liked. Dinosaurs, specifically. He had been obsessed with dinosaurs since he was barely 2 years old, could name them all. God. Would correct adults who got them wrong without any self-consciousness whatsoever. He talked about how Noah had asked the previous week whether dinosaurs would be in heaven, and how Daniel had not known what to say to that. So he had simply said yes, he was sure of it, and Noah had seemed satisfied with the answer and gone back to sleep. William listened to all of it, without looking away. There is a particular kind of conversation that happens between men in moments of crisis. It is not like the conversations women have, which tend to move toward connection and shared feeling fairly directly. Men often talk around the thing, approaching it from the edges, describing practical details and peripheral facts until enough trust has been built to allow the actual weight of it to be named. That was what was happening in the corner of that small room. Daniel was talking about dinosaurs and paper cups and hospital schedules. And what he was really saying was something else entirely, something that had been building in him for 11 weeks and had nowhere to go. William knew this. He had learned it the hard way, from his own years of carrying things that had no clean exit. "You're doing brilliantly," he said at one point. Simply that. Not as a performance, not as a royal platitude. Just as a true thing, said by one human being to another. Daniel looked at him. His jaw tightened. He looked back down at the paper cup. "I don't feel like I am," he said. "No," William said. "That's usually how it feels when you actually are." Meanwhile, Noah had been watching all of this from his bed with the particular alertness of a small child. who senses that the adults around him are engaged in something important. He was tired, visibly, deeply tired in a way that children should not be, but his eyes were sharp, moving between Kate and his mother, then back to William and his father, taking everything in. After a while, he looked directly at William and said, in a voice that was small but completely certain, "Are you really a prince?" The room shifted slightly. The adults all looked at the boy. William leaned forward in his chair. "I am, yeah," he said. Noah considered this seriously. "Do you have a crown?" "Not with me today," William admitted. "I don't wear it to the hospital." "Why?" "Because it would look a bit silly, wouldn't it?" Driving through London with a crown on, Noah thought about this and seemed to accept the logic. Then he said, "My dad says I'm brave." "Your dad's right," William said. "Are you brave?" Noah asked. It was the kind of question that only a child could ask without guile, without any awareness of the weight it carried. William paused for a moment. Not a hesitation, exactly. More like the pause of a person deciding to answer honestly instead of easily. "I try to be," he said. "Some days are harder than others." Noah nodded, as though this made complete sense to him. As though at 4 years old, in an 11-week hospital stay, he already knew something about the days that are harder than others. Kate had been watching this exchange from across the room. She looked at Noah's mother and saw that the woman was crying, quietly, without trying to hide it. Not from sadness exactly, or not only from sadness, from something more complicated. The sight of her son talking so naturally, so completely like himself in the middle of everything, the reminder of who he was when illness was not the only thing filling the room. Kate reached over and placed her hand over the woman's hand on the bedside table. She did not speak. She just held it there, outside in the corridor. The rest of the visit was waiting. There were schedules and aids and a program that had been arranged for weeks. None of it mattered right now. Time in that room had moved according to its own rules, and neither William nor Kate had any interest in rushing it. Daniel set down the paper cup. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at William. "Thank you for coming in," he said. "You didn't have to. You wanted to," William said, and it was true. That was the thing about these moments that never quite made it into the coverage or the official records. The visits that changed something were never the ones that had been planned down to the minute. They were always the ones that happened through a door at the end of a corridor. The ones a nurse mentioned quietly with an apology already prepared. The ones where no photographer was waiting and no statement would be released afterward. Those were the ones that stayed with them. Those were the ones they drove home thinking about. In silence, with the city passing outside the windows and a feeling in the car that neither of them had a name for, but both of them understood. They did not talk on the drive back. This was not unusual for them. There were different kinds of silence between two people who have been together long enough to understand each other. The silence in that car was not the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind that holds things. The kind that says, "I am processing. I trust you enough to do it beside you without explanation." The driver kept his eyes on the road. The city moved past the windows, red buses, black cabs, people walking fast on pavements with coats pulled close against the October chill. Normal life, carrying on the way it always does. Entirely unaware of what had just happened in a small room in a hospital 3 miles behind them, William looked out the window. He was thinking about Daniel, about the paper cup turning in the man's large hands, about the way Daniel had looked at the ceiling before saying thank you, as though he was trying to hold himself in place. William had seen that look before. He had given that look before. In private moments, in rooms where no one was watching. He had found himself in that same posture, looking up, fighting gravity, trying to keep a face that the world needed to see as steady. There is a particular loneliness to being strong for a long time. Not the dramatic kind of loneliness, not the kind that announces itself loudly. Just the quiet, persistent kind that comes from being the person who holds things together. Daniel was holding things together for his family. He had been doing it for 11 weeks. He would keep doing it. William had no doubt about that, because that is what fathers do. What parents do, what people do when the people they love need them to, but God. It cost something. Kate was thinking about the mother, about the way she had cried without making a sound, the tears just sliding down her face while her son talked to a prince about dinosaurs and bravery, about the exhaustion behind her eyes that no amount of sleep could properly reach. Because the exhaustion was not really about sleep at all. It was about the sustained effort of loving someone who was sick. The daily act of walking into that room and sitting down and being present without falling apart, of answering questions in a steady voice, keeping the fear somewhere your child cannot see it. Kate understood something about that. Not from her own life. Her children were healthy, growing. It's blessedly ordinary in the way that only parents of healthy children can fully appreciate. But she understood it from the inside of herself, from the place where she had stored the things she had witnessed over years of visits like this one. They accumulated, those things. They did not disappear when you left the room. They went somewhere inside you and changed the landscape slightly. The way water changes stone, slowly, invisibly. Permanently, she turned from the window and looked at William. He was still looking out the other side. She said, quietly, Noah reminded me of George. When George was that age, that same certainty about everything. William turned. Something moved across his face, a flicker of something sharp and tender at the same time. Yeah, he said. He did. That was all. They both turned back to their windows. But the silence after that was slightly different. Warmer. More inhabited. They had placed something into the shared space between them, and it had been received. That evening, when the children were home from school, and the house was loud again with the particular cheerful chaos of 3 children under 12, William found himself watching them. Really watching them, in the way you only do when something has reminded you to. George arguing about something at the dinner table with the conviction of someone twice his age, Charlotte quietly organizing her placemat with a precision that had always slightly baffled him. Louis saying something completely unpredictable, and then dissolving into laughter at his own joke before he had even finished telling it. He thought about Noah, lying in that bed. He thought about Daniel sitting beside it, 11 weeks in, turning a paper cup in his hands. He did not say anything. He just watched his children and ate his dinner, and felt the full, complicated weight of what it means to have something. You love more than you thought you were capable of loving anything, and to know, in the way that all parents know, somewhere beneath the daily noise, that the world makes no promises. Kate watched him watching the children. She knew what he was doing. She was doing it too. After dinner, after bath time, after the usual negotiations over who deserved to stay up 5 more minutes and why, they got the children settled and came back downstairs to the quiet of the house. Kate made tea. She was always the one who made tea when things needed to be talked about. And they sat at the kitchen table and let themselves feel what the day had left behind. I want to go back, Kate said. I want to check on them. Liam nodded immediately. We'll arrange it. It's not officially, she said. I don't mean a visit. I just mean go back. As people, he understood exactly what she meant. There was a version of royal life in which everything was formal, scheduled, catalogued. And then there was the version that mattered, the version where you drove back to a hospital with no cameras and no program, knocked on a door at the end of a corridor, and sat with a family because they needed someone to sit with them. I'll talk to the team tomorrow, he said. Kate wrapped both hands around her mug. He asked you if you were brave, she said. Yeah. What did you think about when he asked? William was quiet for a moment. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the garden was dark. I thought about the last 2 years, he said. Everything we went through. Everything we didn't say publicly. All of it. He paused. I thought about how many times I felt like I wasn't. And then I thought about how Noah has probably felt that way too at 4 years old in a hospital bed. And somehow he's still asking questions and smiling at strangers and wanting to know about dinosaurs in heaven. Kate looked at him. He's braver than I'll ever be, William said. She reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. The same gesture she had made in the car without realizing it. The same one she had made at the door before they walked in. Always reaching. Always finding him. Oh, she said. You're the same. You're exactly the same as him. He looked at her. You're both just trying, she said. That's all brave ever is. The kitchen was quiet. The tea cooled in their mugs, and something that had been sitting in William's chest since 6 o'clock that morning, that unnamed heaviness he had woken with, the one that had followed him through the whole day without explaining itself, finally, slowly began to ease. 3 days later, they went back. There were no cameras. No advance team, no official notification, no press statement prepared for afterward. Just William and Kate in an ordinary car, driving through London on a Thursday afternoon with a bag on the back seat that Kate had packed herself some books with bright covers, a small stuffed dinosaur she had found in a shop the previous day, a card that the children had made that morning without being told exactly who it was for, only that it was for a little boy who needed cheering up. George had drawn what he claimed was a Tyrannosaurus Rex, though it looked more like a large chicken with ambitions. Charlotte had written a message in her careful, deliberate handwriting. Louis had contributed a series of enthusiastic yellow and orange scribbles that he had described, with complete confidence, as the sun being happy. Kate had added them all in without editing or explanation. They were exactly right. The hospital did not know they were coming until about an hour before. A quiet call had been made, a small number of staff informed, and a request passed along to Noah's family. Did they mind a visit? No pressure, entirely up to them. The answer had come back within minutes. Of course, please, yes. Daniel was standing in the corridor when they arrived. He had clearly been waiting, but was trying to look as though he had not been. He shook William's hand with both of his, which was not something he had done the first time. And the extra hand meant something. It was the kind of handshake that carries a message beyond courtesy. He's been talking about you, Daniel said to William. Every day since. Told everyone who came in, doctor, nurses, the cleaner, that he'd met a prince. The cleaner thought he was making it up. William laughed. A real one, not a formal one. I hope he set the record straight. Oh, he did. Very firmly. They went inside together. The room felt slightly different from the first visit. Still small, still quiet, still carrying that particular hospital air that is difficult to describe and impossible to forget. But something in the atmosphere had shifted. The first visit had been unexpected, formal in its unexpectedness. This one felt like something else. It felt oddly like returning somewhere. Noah was sitting up. This alone made the room brighter. He had been lying down the first time, pale and flat against the white pillow. His energy rationed out carefully against the demands his body was making on him. Now he was propped against the headboard with a book. Across his lap, and an expression of determined focus that suggested he had been waiting very specifically and was not going to show it. When he saw them, he immediately straightened up further, which was physically unnecessary but clearly felt important to him. You came back, he said. We said we would, Kate told him. You didn't actually say that, he pointed out. She smiled. You're right. We didn't. But we wanted to. He considered this with the moral seriousness of a 4-year-old and decided it was acceptable. Kate sat down and produced the bag. This was clearly the right order of operations, because Noah's eyes went immediately to it with an intensity that briefly made him look exactly like a healthy child on a birthday morning. She brought out the card first, which he examined at length, going over each contribution with great attention. He spent the longest time on Louis's son. What is that? He asked, pointing. That's the sun being happy, Kate told him. He looked at it again. Oh, he said. Yes, I can see that now. William had brought something too, a small notebook with a dark green cover, the kind you could put in a pocket, and on the first page he had written something in his own handwriting. He gave it to Daniel rather than Noah, quietly, while Kate and Noah were going through the bag. Daniel opened it and read what was written. He stood there for a moment without speaking, then closed the notebook and held it against his chest with one hand. He did not explain to anyone what it said. William did not ask him to. Noah's mother, whose name was Sarah, had brought tea from the family room down the corridor. She seemed lighter than she had the first time. Not lighter in the sense of being less burdened, because the burden had not changed, but lighter in the sense of being less alone in it. She sat beside Kate, and they talked the way they had found themselves talking on that first visit, not about royal things, not about public things, not about anything that would read oddly in a newspaper. They talked about children, About the specific chaos of raising people who are very small and have extremely strong opinions about everything. About the things that make you laugh even when you are not supposed to be laughing. About the moment which every parent knows when a child says something so precisely true that you are not sure whether to be proud or slightly alarmed, Sarah told Kate about a morning. About 6 weeks into the hospital stay, when Noah had woken up and immediately asked whether penguins got cold. She had explained that penguins lived in cold places naturally, that they were built for it. And Noah had considered this very seriously, and then said, "So they're always comfortable then? That's nice for them." And then he had gone back to sleep. Kate laughed properly, warmly. The kind of laugh that happens when a story is so perfectly itself that no embellishment could improve it. Sarah laughed too. And for just a moment, in a small room in a London hospital, in the middle of 11 weeks of the hardest thing, a mother laughed without thinking about what was happening to her son. That was what the visit gave her. Not answers, not solutions, not a reversal of anything. Just that. A real laugh offered and received, in a place where laughter had not been for a while. Before they left, Noah asked William a question he had clearly been preparing for a while. You could tell by the way he paused before asking it, gathering himself, choosing the words with the care of someone who knows the question is important. "If I get better," he said, "can I come and see where you live?" The room went still. William leaned forward in his chair. He looked at the boy, at this 4-year-old, who said, "If not when," with the clear-eyed practicality of a child who has learned, somehow, to hold hope loosely, and he felt something move through him that started in his chest and had nowhere in particular to go. "When you get better," he said, correcting Noah gently, putting the word back where it belonged. "We'll sort something out. I promise." Noah nodded. He seemed satisfied. He lay back against his pillow, holding the stuffed dinosaur Kate had brought, and closed his eyes with the peaceful expression of a child who has received confirmation of something he had already, in his own quiet way, decided to believe. 6 weeks later, a letter arrived. It came through the proper channels. There was a system for correspondence. There always was, but whoever had been dealing with the post that morning had flagged it immediately, and it had been placed on the desk where it would be seen before anything else. The envelope was small, white, slightly crumpled at one corner, in the way that envelopes sometimes get when a child has been involved in the process. The address on the front was written in adult handwriting, but across the back, in a different hand, uneven, determined. Unmistakably a child's, someone had written a single word. William, all in capitals. Underlined twice. He opened it at his desk, standing up, coat still on. He read it once quickly, the way you read things when you are not prepared to be hit by them. And then he sat down and read it again slowly. It was from Sarah. She wrote to say that Noah had come home 14 days ago, that the treatment had done what they had stopped daring to hope it would do, and that the doctors had used words like remarkable and stronger than expected, and that Daniel had cried in the car park afterward, the proper kind of crying, the kind that only happens when something goes right rather than wrong, the kind you have been keeping held back for weeks, just in case you needed it for the other outcome. She wrote that Noah was eating again, that he had already reorganized all of his dinosaur books by size and then by color and then back by size again, that he had told his nursery teacher, on his first day back, walking in through the gate like he had never left, that he was friends with a prince, and that the teacher had apparently said, "That was lovely," and Noah had said, "No, I really am," and the teacher had said, "Of course you are," and Noah had decided this was not worth arguing about and had gone to find the building. Block, she wrote, he still has the dinosaur. He sleeps with it every night. He calls it William. There was a drawing at the end, enclosed carefully, slightly soft at the folds. A child's drawing done in crayon, a boy with yellow hair, a woman with long dark hair, and 2 tall figures standing beside them. Above the tall figures, in the same determined child's capitals as the writing on the envelope, Noah had written, "The Prince and the Princess." Both figures had crowns. Neither looked remotely like the actual people. Both looked, somehow, exactly right. William set the letter down. He looked at the drawing for a long time. He took it to Kate. She read it at the kitchen counter, one hand over her mouth by the end of it, not saying anything. She held the drawing in both hands and looked at the crayon crowns and the yellow-haired boy, and the tall figures with their lopsided smiles. Then she looked up at William with her eyes full, and he was already looking at her. And neither of them had to say a single word about what they were feeling because they were feeling exactly the same thing. Later, Kate framed the drawing. She did not put it in a formal room or a hallway where it would be seen by visitors and officials. She put it somewhere private, somewhere that mattered, a place she passed every day. At the right height to look at properly, in the light that fell well in the mornings. Not because it was a piece of royal correspondence or a gift from a notable person, because it was from a boy called Noah, who had slept with a stuffed dinosaur in a hospital bed and told a prince he was brave and drawn a picture for people. He had only met twice, and somehow made those 2 meetings feel, at least to the people receiving the drawing, like something far more permanent. There was a conversation William had with Daniel months later, when they had maintained what had become a quiet and genuine contact, occasional messages, a phone call here and there, the kind of communication that does not announce itself publicly and does not need to. Daniel had said something during one of those calls that William would carry with him for a long time. He had said, "I think the hardest part wasn't the fear. The hardest part was not knowing whether all the strength I was trying to show was actually helping Noah, or whether it was just making me feel less useless." And then one day he just looked at me and said, "You're still here, Dad." Just that. Like that was the whole answer. William had been quiet for a moment. That's all it was, Daniel had said. Just staying in the room. Just not leaving. William thought about that many times in the weeks that followed. About what it costs to stay in the room when everything in you wants to find somewhere else to be. About how the staying, the simple, unheroic, uncelebrated act of staying is often the thing that ends up mattering most to the people around you. Even when you cannot see it, even when you are convinced it is not enough. He and Kate had stayed in that room. They had gone back to it. They had carried what they found there all the way home and let it sit in the kitchen with them and change something in how they saw their own children, their own lives, their own ordinary evenings. They had not solved anything. They had not fixed anything. A royal visit to a hospital does not cure illness or remove fear or restore what has already been taken. William knew that. Kate knew it, but they had stayed in the room. And sometimes, in the particular mathematics of love and grief and ordinary human courage, the kind that does not make newspapers and does not get awarded anything, does not know how to explain itself. Sometimes that is exactly enough. The drawing stayed on the wall. The dinosaur stayed on Noah's bed. And somewhere in the daily life of 2 people who carried more than most people would ever know, the memory of one small boy's smile, given freely, in the middle of everything stayed too, quiet, permanent, completely, unexpectedly, capable of undoing them every time they let themselves. Think about it. Which was often, because some things you do not put down. You just carry them with you, and you let them be heavy, and you are grateful.